Our proposal includes a 4-year locked system investment capital plan that is somewhat similar to the existing plan from the previous 4 years. And, that focuses on the day-to-day operations of the company, reliability, not the larger resiliency package, but, think of voltage conversions, road projects derived by V.S.A. doing a road rebuild, IT system investments, security investments, generation, safety, FERC, environmental. So more of the normal day-to-day operational capital that we've continued to do over the years. The new resilience project framework, again, the proposed plan calls for a renewed scope and planning that we would present each year upfront that would be informed by projects that we've completed in the existing ZOI program, what we've learned through that, the performance of the systems we put in, the cost benefits that we're seeing, and with updated cost benefit analysis of those. We anticipate there to ask for $150 million not to exceed in fiscal year 27. And that will have a project plan that actually shows the circuits and the zones within those circuits that work would be done in. And again, that would focus on the circuits that we continue to have reliability issues with beyond the normal day-to-day system investments. The customer-driven storage, Josh hit that quite a bit in his earlier slides. Again, we would need to update a tariff filing, and that would also be based on customer-driven work, and we work through that in the tariff filing, how exactly that would be done going forward. We heard the feedback on strategic opportunities, and we're narrowing any strategic opportunities pretty much to 2. Just the repowering of Searsburg and the possible purchase of Deerfield Wind. Anything outside of those would require a petition to amend the plan. So we've limited strategic opportunities in this new plan proposal.
Just a quick question about the $150 million there. Would that be proposed as part of the base rate filing that will be filed next year?
Correct. It would be filed with the base rate filing in January with the proposed scoping and planning of what those projects would be for the following year. And then each year after that, we would come in with a new proposal on all the learnings we get from the projects we're doing in the previous year.
And you're anticipating that the commission would approve that annual budget filing as part of a base rate adjustment, or how would that correspond?
Yes, each year when we would file for the base rate filing, we would also file our resiliency plan for that year with an up to cap, not to go into rates immediately, but to go in as the projects are completed up to a certain cap.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Allen?
Yeah, and I'm assuming I can just anticipate your testimony covering the rate implications of that $150 million investment. Correct?
It would cover that, and it would also cover the savings that that work would generate. Yes.
Great, thanks.
So, Mr. Burke, I've got a question about this. In my mind, this actually seems like one of the more significant changes to the MYRP. The existing MYRP, at least in theory, the capital costs were all sort of capped at the very beginning of the plan. And then there was allowances, which I think GMP availed itself of almost every year throughout the plan. Here you're saying up front that more than half the potential capital costs are actually not capped. In other words, you're only doing sort of in some ways, the bare minimum, that there would be a cap, or that the bare minimum of capital investments would be known up front, but then the resilience and the customer storage would be on a year-to-year basis. And I'm just kind of curious as to, does GMP agree that this is a significant change? And if so, what's the justification for it?
Our proposal, we continue to see damage and we continue to see the savings from the projects that we've already done just in the past year in the ZOI order. So currently, with what we're seeing and what we know is still out there that needs to be addressed in terms of resiliency, we feel like this investment is in line with what we need to do in order to bring costs down and keep customers safe in the home. So yes, if you look at strictly math, the 115 versus the 150, it is a bit more than the base amount, but we feel that the savings derived from that investment will offset the cost of that in terms of what goes into rate base. And also, we're saying and up to, because again, it's a scoping mechanism, and if for some reason these projects aren't able to be completed, there wouldn't be anything going into rates. But at least up front, we're proposing a up to cap, so that can all be looked at.
So a couple of follow-up questions. Customer-driven storage, are those costs included in that locked base capital investment plan, or are those updated every year? I'm trying to make sure I understand that one.
Those would be dated every year, and how that would work exactly, we propose when we file our tariff there to work through that. Josh, I don't know if you would have anything to add on that.
The only thing, Mr. Chairman, is so, and I do mention this a little bit in testimony, but we would anticipate there being through the tariff process some, not to exceed being set as we go through that looking forward. What we proposed was to then deploy the systems and then put the adjustment in the following year deployed, but would anticipate some sort of do not to exceed amount as part of that process.
Thanks. So Mr. Burke, another follow-up. I'm curious about why the resilience project the framework needs to be updated every year. This is something that ever since the climate plan back in 22, something like that, it seems like pretty much every year GMP is putting forward this idea of we need to spend more on resilience, but there has not been clarity as to what that longer term path looks like, despite having every year for the last several years asked for additional funding to do that. And I'm just curious, is GMP thinking they're going to get to a point where they can start projecting out over a multi-year rate plan what the investment strategy will be for resilience? And I guess I'm just curious, why not now?
Much like the order read, we are learning both in terms of how the construction is going, learning different things on the outcomes and benefits. And, for us to propose a certain amount of spending right now, looking out 4 years, we absolutely plan to learn and decide whether it should be much less in the outer years than the 150 we're proposing for next year, or probably not exceed that much, but just there's a lot of unknowns going out 3 or 4 years based on even the continued climate and what that does in the next three years or so. So just to come up with a plan right now that says exactly how much we think we need to spend in the next 4 years, it's just not something we're comfortable with. But each year, based on what we'd done the previous year and how much we feel is left out there that needs to be addressed, would dictate what we propose in the following year.
Okay, thanks. Before I turn it over to Commissioner Allen, I guess my last question is, given that, at least in my mind, this is a significant change in how you're treating capital costs, is there a commensurate change in calculation of ROE? Or was there any thought to changing how you are thinking about ROE, given the fact that you're significantly changing how you're thinking about capital costs?
Rob, I know you covered ROE.
Correct.
Mr. Chairman,
So-
maybe as Rob is jumping in, one thing we are certainly thinking about is, of course, this approach has some increased risk for GMP. It is a upfront estimate of a not to exceed, with the amounts only approved into rates once the projects are completed going forward. So it is a change in that approach. I'm not sure we've had detailed discussions about whether that change, results in needing to change the ROE. That from the company's perspective, it's actually an increase in many ways and risks to try to get this work done for customers as soon as possible, but with the flexibility to allow, as Mr. Burke said, some of the learning of, as the commission's aware that, the Zoe work really only started last fall. And so we're in that phase of just implementing that work now, and to give time to incorporate that and then have a mechanism that allows it to go forward. That's how overall we've approached it. Rob, I don't know if you'd add anything to that.
No, except to ask, Mr. Chairman, I didn't totally understand the question, so could you elaborate a little bit more, please?
Yeah, I guess just looking at some of the prior orders on MYRP, there's, at least in my mind, some connection between the ROE. Essentially, MYRP reduces overall risk for GMP, and the ROE is counts for that to some degree. And I'm curious now, one of the significant changes, and this is actually, I think, a risk both to GMP and to customers with the resilience project framework, because there is the possibility of significant capital investments without any real positive impact on storm costs, at least in the near term, in terms of when those costs come in. So I'm asking, my question is really about, and you don't need to answer it at this time, but the question is, if there's a change in thinking about how you're spending capital costs, or what portion of capital costs are sort of locked in, is there also a rethinking about the ROE and what is appropriate ROE? That still might not be very helpful to you, but
Mr. Hand's response is essentially where we are with that.
okay, fair enough. Thanks.
There is
That's
definitely
interesting.
risk, though, to GMP, because we're proposing up to amounts. And if we don't achieve those, then the company absorbs those costs that would then flow to O&M. So we actually have higher risk associated with that, introducing an up to amount rather than putting it in base rates. Because, for example, labor that we're projecting to capitalize would then flow to O&M. And our bandwidths are approximately, before any sharing, $7 to $8 million. So GMP would absorb that, which is increased risk.
Yep,
But
appreciate that.
definitely appreciate the perspective, and we'll take it into account in the testimony related to ROE.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And thank you, Mr. Bingle. And thank you, Mr. Burke. Commissioner Allen.
Thanks. So we've been talking about the resilience project framework, and we've been looking at the number 150 million. We've been talking about 4 years, but in my mind, I'm wondering how much of a broader vision for implementing that framework are we talking about? Is that 600 million all that we're talking about, or is the total framework, the investment associated with the total framework looking forward a much larger number?
the way we're looking at that is to see what we're experiencing as we go forward. So, for instance, if we get 2 years from now and we've drastically reduced costs on the storm front from the investments that we've already done in the previous 3 or 4 years, then that is something that we would look to reduce. If we start experiencing statewide events where we're doubling and tripling our storm restoration response, we'd probably look at something different there. So it really is what our customers are experiencing in cost, both in terms of storm and how these investments are playing out going forward. So I don't think we have an absolute thought on what it might take. We certainly know where the, for lack of a better word, is low hanging fruit is. If you look at what we proposed for Zoe, we had scoped out $250 million of work, and we've since scoped out more than that in that proposal. And we are only doing 150. So we know there is still some areas that see incredible increased risk from wind, higher wet snow events and things like that, that we know need to be addressed. But as we get out further in this MYRP, if we're not seeing things as bad and affecting customers in terms of cost and outages, then we may adjust that. So it really is going to be watching to see what's happening with costs, both on the storm front, costs versus benefit on Zoe, and what we're seeing on the ground. And that's why we're proposing each year we would come forward with a plan that you would have the full capability to review before we move forward.
And will we have the benefit of essentially the Zoe investments to date? And you're kind of an example of kind of the experience and your learning and how you would be using that to inform, the investments going forward.
Yes, I think I mentioned previously, every project we've done so far, even this weekend with 500 separate outages, 30,000 customers, and this was in the area where we've been doing the zero outages, none of those lines went out. We actually battled this storm, which had quite a few events in it, with only about 30 to 35 outside contractors, which events like this in the past, we've needed more. So I think we're seeing real savings in the moment from these projects, and the customers are certainly having a different experience where we've done it as well. So yes, the answer is yes, we will be able to show you the outcome and the learnings from these projects that we're doing now.
Thank you very much.
So just to follow up on the timing there, with the base rate adjustment, that the amount would be for the resilience projects would be filed as part of that. I'm concerned that the time frame is a very short time turnaround for the commission's review. So to review such a large capital investment plan during that time frame, I think it's 2 months that the commission has. Would it be possible to file that earlier and have that be a separate approval process, separate that would lead up to the base rate filing, so that there would be more time for review?
Maybe, Mike, if I can just clarify, the first year, the FY27 will be filed with the FY27 rate case. So in that first year, there'll be sort of a full traditional rate review. I think you're asking about subsequent years.
Yes.
And one of the things we have proposed is filing that up to amount earlier with, for example, we provide the department earlier our sort of forecasted power supply numbers a month plus earlier. And I think we proposed filing that resilience work, at least with the department, earlier, so that there's a longer period of time. So that has been considered.
I think that it would probably be helpful for the commission to have that process be earlier as well, or if you could consider that. it is a large investment that would need to be reviewed and considered. So I'm concerned that as part of the base rate filing, it could get lost in the shuffle. So I'd like it to be a separate filing, or consider having it be a separate filing.
Appreciate the perspective. Well, yeah, we'll certainly look at the options there. And the goal, I think,
Great.
with providing this first year in line with the rate case is to really set up the process for that review so everyone's familiar with the level of information that's being provided, the cost benefit analysis that's being done on the work, and what it would look like going forward. So understand the perspective.
Okay, thank you.
So Dan Burke.
Yeah, I was gonna piggyback off of Commissioner Allen's requests about information. And Mr. Burke, you were talking about supplying in your testimony in support of the upcoming rate case. I don't want to mischaracterize what you're saying, but sort of what's been working and providing more detail on that. I think what would also be helpful for us to see is some sort of granular level data on the actual work that was done. And I don't know how best to do this. Maybe you could look at an individual circuit that's been upgraded and give us a perspective of what the pre-construction budgets were, what the post-construction actual costs were, and kind of what was in the actual project, so we can get a sense of, what's getting built, what's getting done, where were, from your perspective, any unanticipated costs or construction challenge points. And I think kind of helping us through that learning process you've had, both on the logistics and the financial side, would be really helpful.
Yes, I do speak to some of that in my direct testimony, but yes, we can look at getting even more granular with the data you mentioned here.
Thank you.
Okay, I think if there are no further questions there, Mr. Bingle will cover cost of capital and capital structure next.
So we plan on submitting again as part of our 2027 cost of service an ROE. It'll be a fully litigated case. And so ultimately the PUC will decide what the initial ROE is for 2027. In subsequent filings, we propose to stick with our with our methodology, where we look at the 10-year Treasury rate, and year over year, we adjust by 50% of that change. We are requesting a couple small changes. The first one is to extend the measurement period from 3 months to 6 months. That just damps volatility and is helpful. And then the second part is to have the measurement time period end at the end of March instead of mid-May. There's a little bit of scrambling that happens with that ending in mid-May. And so because it's right before a June 1st filing. Just like our current plan, we plan on locking our long-term interest rates in fiscal year 27 and 28. So fiscal year 27, that'll be part of our traditional cost of service, and we would lock in our expected interest rates for any debt issuances in that year. In the 28 filing, we would then lock in the long-term interest rates for 28 through 30. One change is that we are proposing to update our short-term debt rates based upon a SOFR forecast because our line of credit is tied to that SOFR rate. One other change is that we are proposing to get upfront approval for the amounts of long-term debt issuances that we expect in 27 through 30. So that would mean that when we file our traditional cost of service, we show the amount of debt we're expecting to issue for 27, 28, 29, and 30. It would be reviewed by a DPS and the PUC, and then be subject to PUC approval. The idea there is that when we then go out to the market, we're a little bit more nimble because the approval process will have taken place. And so we can take advantage of any market opportunities that may arise, which would be in the customer's favor. We would still have to notify the PUC. And also, if there are any changes in the amount of debt issuances, we would have to go through the Section 108 approval process. And then lastly, we are, just like always, we're proposing to maintain a capital structure at 50% debt, 50% equity, plus or minus 100 basis points. Mr. Burke, you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the upfront Section 108 process. Are you considering, when you're putting that together, I want to say sort of your base capital expense, or is that anticipated to include the ZOI spending as well?
It is anticipated to include resilient spending. So it is, because if we don't include it, then we will go through the Section 108 approval process.
Okay, and is that going to be, and that your anticipation is for really the full year? So you would have at least some forecast of what your resiliency spending would be over the next 3 years to put that plan together?
For that, for this part of this, yes, we would. Yep.
So, Mr. Bingle, with respect to sort of almost 4-year approval for long-term debt issuance, I'm curious, is GMP contemplating some sort of bands within the 4-year approval? And in other words, what the interest rates, a no-go on either end for interest, well, one end, I guess, for interest rates, or would it be open-ended? I'm just curious how we're projecting out. I mean, 4 years is potentially a significant period of time when it comes to interest rates, and how we would be issuing a meaningful approval and meaningful review in the first year of 4 years, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Right. This would be more about the dollar amounts. And so we are, again, still proposing to forecast the interest rates in 27, set it for 27, and then 28 through 30, lock in whatever those interest rates are. But it's the actual dollar amounts where we're seeking the approval. And then the market is the market, but we want to be prudent about that as well and make sure that the interest rates that we obtain are in the customer's favor. We can't control that, but by having this approval up front, when there are some little blips that happen in the market, we can be more nimble and take advantage of them.
Thanks, and thanks for politely pointing out that I missed one of the preceding bullets. So that makes sense. Yep.
Okay, so no further questions here. Oh, I see. Central question.
Hi, yes, this is Stephen Hunt at GDS. Following that conversation, could you just clarify how the potential market changes in debt rates would flow to customers if the long-term debt rates are locked for the 4-year period?
That's a great question. And how it would flow is it would be, earlier, Commissioner Allen had a question about interest rates and how they affect some of regulatory assets. So they would affect the weighted average cost of capital that we have in our ESAM calculation that happens at the end of each fiscal year. For these debt issuances, the ones that tend to be, you can think about our total capital structure. Each individual debt issuance is not a huge amount on a more, a bigger level, but that's how they would be captured, Stephen.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about how the current process hinders GMP from moving forward? The current Section 108 where GMP, I think it's usually annually, sometimes twice a year. What are we trying to fix here by this new proposal?
Two things. So the first thing is that it is a longer time period for the approval. So it is, we have to submit the filing and then we have to present to the commission, and then the commission has several months to give approval. And then there's also an appeal time period. And so this would, by getting the approval up front, meanwhile, by the way, the market could be changing because we can't lock in without the approval. And so by having the approval up front, we could lock in or at least obtain favorable interest rates if they arise. Second part is there's a cost associated with each filing. And so by having this done up front, it would reduce administrative costs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Dillon, I'm going to turn it over to you on O&M treatment.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Similar to our current plan we have in place, our O&M costs will fall primarily into these three categories. Some of the costs will be fixed at the beginning of the plan. We'll know what they're going to be through fiscal year 30. That's going to be costs like payroll. And then we'll have some costs that are updated annual based on some predetermined methodology or a formula. And those are going to be costs like insurance expense. And then there's costs such as tree trimming, where at the beginning of the plan, we aren't able to forecast what those are going to be for the term of the plan. So each year, those costs go out to bid. And so we have a new new expense determined each year that's filed. Having these types of adjustments are important each year to be able to really minimize the potential of a SAM adjustment. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here.
Questions on O&M before we turn to performance metrics?
Just one quick one. And my apologies, I should know the testimony better. Is there anything about sort of a look back over the last couple of MYRPs in terms of how much needs to be updated? In other words, what percentage of costs need to be updated every year? Essentially, how accurate are the forecasts every year of sort of the known O&M costs? And then also, well, no, I'll just leave it at that. I'm just kind of curious about how big these updates are on an annual basis.
Sure. So I wouldn't say that analysis is included in the testimony, but certainly taken into account as we're determining what types of costs we think need to be adjusted as opposed to costs that we've seen not fluctuate as much. And I think we can look at something like property taxes, where year over year we've had a fixed amount in the filing. However, these past couple of years, we've realized those expenses can be quite volatile, and we've seen huge increases and also decreases. And so we've taken into account internally that analysis and said, you know what, we need to adjust those each year.
Great. Thank you. That's helpful.
I've got a question about, sorry, back to the O&M. In terms of the inflation adjustments, could you explain a little bit about why GMP has chosen to use the consumer price index for urban consumers, the Northeast one, for all of the inflation adjustments?
Yeah, I may ask Rob to jump in here.
Yeah, sure. The last cost of service, 2023, we actually did have differing metrics, and it was pointed out that we should have one. So that was based on feedback that we got during the audit of our last filing. So as part of our 2023 cost of service, we agreed to use that metric.
And forgive me for not knowing this, but what multiple metrics were you using before then?
There was another one, CPI Northeast, but it wasn't urban. I believe that's what it was, Jacob. But it was a different one, and your team rightfully pointed out that we should have one.
Okay, I remember that now. So part of why I'm asking is because based on the types of expenses that are in the O&M, it seems like it's possible that there are other price metrics, therefore inflationary metrics, that would be more in line. So for instance, things that are related to production might use the producer price index instead of the CPI. So I'm curious about kind of the the general approach and consideration for using the CPI instead of other price metrics?
The biggest driver is we want something that's simple and that it can be easily updated and easily traceable. And so we have the government issues this metric on a monthly basis, except this month when they chose to delay it a little bit because the government shut down. But that is why we are using this one metric.
Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you. Mr. Castigay, do you want to wrap us up on performance metrics? Oh, I'm sorry, Dan.
Hey, Mr. Burke. Yep.
I just have one question. This is probably more germane to your cost of service filing that's coming in, but I'm wondering how you're dealing with increased benefit costs, specifically health insurance, because I know all aspects of the Vermont economy are getting hit by that. Is that affecting your overhead calculations that you're using, or is kind of how is that folding into your projections that you have here?
Yeah, I can touch on that a little bit. So I wouldn't say that it affects the calculation of the overhead, but certainly the costs that go into the overhead. And so we've been in, communication with our insurance companies, like trying to get updated information on our active medical. And because you're right, we are seeing increase in these costs. And so that would be one of the reasons why we have each year we'd be adjusting as we see these changes in costs. But then as a result, you see a higher overhead.
Thank you.
Great. Mr. Castigay, I think you are up now.
Thanks, Jeff. So just to close out with the metrics of the plan. So the previous few plans have incorporated this list of metrics covering everything from capital to EV charging stations, distributed generation, interconnection costs, and more. So we'll continue with those metrics. We'll also incorporate what we call the expanded storage report that we provide to the commission and the parties here at the beginning of each year, which basically looks back and looks at how's all the storage that we've deployed, how's it been doing against peaks, what does it look like it's going to do in the future, or is anything going to change, and continues to re-up the forecast and provide updates on those programs. And the other kind of slight change, we've always had obviously the service quality reliability plan, the SQRP. We're now incorporating it into the reg plan here, which does include its host of metrics and the penalties that are associated with those metrics, those financial penalties there. So that SQRP, which recently has updated with some additional metrics as well. And you can jump ahead, Jeff. I'll just hit some of these. You probably recognize some from previous proceeding, but basically looking to get more granular on the reporting related to the resiliency work, from diving in a little bit. Like, as you know, it's always had a SAFE and Katie, sort of those reliability metrics from the system as a whole. And now this is really meant to look at, okay, we're doing this work. How are those improvements showing up on the system for customers? As we do a zone of work there, what is the experience on the outages? What's the Katie? What's the safety for those locations? And the next one, Jeff, too, just kind of continues with that same list, looking at some of the various components of the breakdown for the work that's happening there, and those have been incorporated as well into this SQRP. So the intention is to continue that forward as part of this plan. That's what I have, Jeff.
Great, thank you. I think that's the end of our presentation. The presentation deck does include an appendix, which has references to a lot of the components we've talked about and their specific plan references. This is a copy of Exhibit GMP LDRB2 for easy reference. So, Commissioner Allen, I see you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. This is a pretty broad one, and I'm not sure if it's for Mr. Castigay or Mr. Burke, but it's a lot of our attention, at least my attention, is focused on the big numbers that are associated with the ZOI initiative and the resilience framework. And we saw some nice slides, I think it's 5 and 6 early in this presentation that kind of laid out, the problem broken out by different districts and whatnot. I'm trying to kind of understand what success looks like. Do all the districts have comparable metrics or outage rates and interruptions, or what is success? I'm imagining it's not zero outages, but what is it? What does it look like?
I can start with that, Josh. So, right now we show it on those slides, Commissioner Allen, that the drastic differences between areas. So, for instance, we don't have any resiliency work proposed for areas like the Colchester district. The areas where we're proposing this work is where we're seeing drastic changes in the experience for customers, because that not only leads to more costs, but it leads to exposure for the customers that live there and exposure for our crews that live there. So no, the goal with the infrastructure resiliency projects isn't zero. We'd certainly like to get to where those customers are somewhat near what we expect in SQUIRP, 2 and a 2. But right now they're more like 10 and 10 or 9 and 9, 9 outages a year for 9 hours. And we're really just trying to bring those areas to create more of an equity between customers. That isn't right now, it's so spread. We're trying to bring that closer together. The storage is what brought us to zero. So yes, without the storage, the infrastructure goal is more in line with what you would expect, barring, even including severe weather, more down around 2 to 3 outages a year, not 10 or 20. And then all the cost reduction that comes with that. That is the goal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well,
Just want to do. Oh, sorry, Mr. Hand. I was just going to ask for a more general call for questions. Otherwise, I know Ms. Pepiti was talking about potentially doing a wrap up for our side here. So just asking if anybody else has any questions while we're all here. Right. Mr. Hunt.
Hi, another question. Just kind of going back to some of the prior slides and wanting to, identifying that there are certain treatments for different categories of capital investment. Different treatments maybe for different categories of O&M cost or labor based upon what it's assigned to. Would you mind spending a little bit of time talking about the controls and process, maybe internal review, audit, training type of things that are being done to be able to properly segregate or put each type of cost for this capital or expense in the right category to ensure the proper treatment of those costs in our rates?
Rob, I can start on a high level and maybe you can jump in after that. So specifically between normal capital and the resilience capital, we actually start with that right in the project approval, and they get different templates, which then tracks the cost differently. Some costs are tracked through the base capital for projects that aren't in the resilience bucket, and the resilience bucket costs are tracked in the resilience bucket based on a different template within our financial system. And that can be said the same in terms of O&M as well. I don't know if you'd add to that, Rob.
Yeah, we have Oracle projects, and that's how we track each individual project. The only other thing I'd add, Stephen, is at the end of every fiscal year, we get audited, and that's a month-long process to make sure that we're doing proper accounting. And that's by an outside firm too.
As a follow-up to that, could you share maybe the extent by which that particular audit focuses on the distinguishing treatments that are associated with rates as opposed to overall financial review? Or is it also a bit more of an internal audit type of function that would be specific to ensuring compliance with how costs are into different capital buckets as defined by the ultimate MYRP approved here?
Well, I can just tell you about my personal experience, which was last Friday, where they asked for the ESAM and asked me all sorts of questions about the ESAM, and I had to supply it to them. So they are going into the different areas and investigating and making sure that we are in compliance. And they're also asking for PUC orders for everything. So in other words, power supply adjusters and such, they are looking for verification of what we put into our financial systems.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can add a little bit too, Rob, that, you know, the auditors are coming in and they're firstly looking at, you know, following GAAP, like they're auditing for that. And they're also taking into account these regulatory orders and making sure those align with GAAP, or do we need to take other things into consideration? And on top of that, we also have internal audit here. So not the external firm, but we have a internal department here that does specifically look at the separation of these resilience projects separate from our regular base rate capital projects. And how are we splitting them out? How are we accounting for them differently? You know, how they're going into the reg assets.
Thank you for that. All right. Ms. Papiti.
Yeah, so I just wanted to just sort of summarize some of the stuff that we talked about. This isn't meant to be exhaustive, but like some follow-up, which was I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page about making a filing with the commission when the public hearing notice is posted, as well as any other associated documents for helping educate customers on the MYRP. And then some of this is just, you know, we'd like to know like a discussion of your consideration of some of the things that we talked about today, which was like one of the examples was making a filing when there's no change in when there's no change in a quarterly in a given quarter to the adjusters, and giving customer notice. One of the other things we talked about was possibly including the ESAM as part of the base rate adjustment. And we talked about whether there was consideration about having an adjuster for the KWH and a separate major storm line item, as opposed to the way that it's being presented. Just, you know, a discussion of your consideration, like why wouldn't it work, or what would be the challenges associated with these other, you know, ideas of looking at how it could be presented. And then we talked about analyzing what the quarterly adjustments, if it had been done on a biannual or annual basis, how that would have affected customer rates. And if it's not possible to do that, just kind of giving us that rationale of why that's a challenge, to give us that information. It would just be helpful to understand the thought process there. And then I think lastly, I had, can the annual resiliency investment amount be presented to the commission earlier than the base rate filing, so that there's some more time to consider what could be, you know, a large capital investment amount. And so those were my notes, and that's not meant to be exhaustive, but I hope it's helpful to just summarize that a little bit. But if I'm missing anything, then please provide us with, you know, what we had, or if any folks from the commission have anything else that we talked about, please chime in.
That's very helpful and lined up with my notes as well. So I appreciate that summary.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anything else we should talk about today? Not seeing anything. Thank you for the presentation. I thought this was really helpful. I appreciate the opportunity to ask the questions. And looking forward to more discussion as this all unfolds. So thank you all very much, and we're adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.